The wheelchair squeaked against the concrete as I rolled up to my son's front door, my pride crumbling with each desperate push. Michael took one look at me sitting there with my pathetic suitcase and said the words that shattered what was left of my heart. "Mom, you can't stay here." But the next morning, I found Robert's old business card tucked in a drawer, and suddenly everything changed when the bank manager nearly knocked over his chair rushing to help me. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. 8 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was learning to live on Social Security after Robert died. Funny how life has a way of laughing at your assumptions. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Isn't it always a Tuesday when your world falls apart? I was coming home from the grocery store, arms full of bags, because I was too proud to use the cart like other old ladies. The rain had started, and these Florida sidewalks become slippery as ice when wet. One moment I was walking, thinking about how I'd stretch the week's budget to include Robert's favorite cookies for his memorial dinner. The next moment I was on the ground, my right hip screaming and my groceries scattered across the parking lot like confetti at a funeral nobody wanted to attend. The paramedic, a kid young enough to be my grandson, kept saying, "Ma'am, try to stay calm," while I lay there calculating how much an ambulance ride was going to cost. 3 surgeries and 4 months of rehabilitation later, here I am. Helen Carter, 68 years old, former bookkeeper, current wheelchair enthusiast. The doctors say I might walk again with enough physical therapy, but physical therapy costs money I don't have. Robert's life insurance barely covered his funeral, and Social Security doesn't exactly fund miracles. The house we'd bought 30 years ago when Michael was in high school became my prison. Everything was upstairs. The bedroom, the bathroom, Robert's office where he'd spent countless hours working on projects I never quite understood. I'd been sleeping on the living room couch for months, using a bedpan like an invalid, showering when my neighbor Mrs. Patterson could help me into her accessible bathroom. My son Michael had visited exactly twice since the accident. The first time, 3 days after I got home from the hospital, he spent 20 minutes explaining how busy he was with work and the kids. The second time, last month, he brought Ashley, his wife, who spent the entire visit checking her phone and making comments about how depressing everything looked. I'd finally swallowed my pride yesterday and called him. "Michael, I need help," I'd said, hating how the words sounded. "I can't manage here anymore." "What kind of help, Mom?" His voice had that careful tone people use when they're already planning their escape. "I need somewhere to stay, just temporarily, until I can figure things out." The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then, "Mom, I'll talk to Ashley. Let me call you back." That was 18 hours ago. No return call. So I'd done something I never thought I'd do. I packed my small suitcase, called a cab, and showed up at their door unannounced. If my own son wouldn't help his disabled mother, maybe seeing me face to face would remind him that family meant something, or so I'd hoped. Now, sitting in their driveway, I understood that hope was just another word for delusion. Their house was a sprawling suburban monument to success. 3-car garage, manicured lawn, the kind of place that screamed, "We've made it." My wheelchair felt like a grocery cart at a Mercedes dealership. I'd rang the doorbell and waited, listening to the sounds of family life filtering through the wall. Children's voices, Ashley calling out about dinner, the television playing some cooking show. Normal life. The kind I used to have. Michael opened the door wearing his weekend uniform, khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. His expression when he saw me sitting there was something I'll never forget. Not surprise, not concern, but irritation. Pure, unmistakable irritation, like I was a salesperson who'd interrupted his Sunday afternoon. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I came to see my family," I'd said, trying to keep my voice steady, and to ask for help, but I already knew from his face that I'd made a mistake. A big one. "You can't just show up here like this," Michael said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Behind him, I could see Ashley hovering in the hallway, her arms crossed and her mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. The grandchildren, my grandchildren, peeked around the corner with curious eyes before being quickly shooed away. "I called you yesterday," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I left a message explaining the situation. "Yeah, and I said I'd call you back." Michael stepped outside and closed the door behind him, as if my presence might contaminate his perfect home. "This isn't how we handle family business, Mom. Family business." As if helping your disabled mother was some sort of corporate negotiation that required advanced scheduling and board approval. "I can't live in my house anymore, Michael. Everything's upstairs and I can't climb stairs. I need help." "And you'll get help," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd perfected in business school. "But showing up here unannounced isn't the answer. Ashley has dinner planned, the kids have homework, we have a routine that apparently didn't include space for his mother. I'm not asking to disrupt expect your routine. Just a place to sleep until I can figure something out. A week, maybe 2. Michael's jaw tightened. Mom, you know how Ashley feels about unexpected changes to our household dynamic. Unexpected changes. That's what I'd become. An unexpected change to their household dynamic. Not his mother who'd raised him, worked 2 jobs to put him through college, and celebrated every one of his achievements like it was a national holiday. Just an inconvenient disruption to their perfect suburban schedule. I helped you buy this house, I said quietly. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the desperate edge in my voice. That was different, he said quickly. That was a loan, and we paid it back. $20,000 we'd given them for the down payment. Robert had liquidated his retirement fund early, paying penalties, because Michael needed help getting established. They'd paid back exactly $3,000 before the payment stopped, and the subject became too awkward to mention. Of course you did, I said, because what else could I say? Standing there, or sitting there in my case, arguing about money wasn't going to change anything. The front door opened, and Ashley appeared, her perfectly highlighted hair and Sunday best, making me acutely aware of my own appearance. Sweatpants, an old blouse, and the kind of desperate energy that follows people who've run out of options. Helen, she said with a smile so fake it could have been purchased at the dollar store. What a surprise. Hello, Ashley. Michael tells me you're having some challenges with your living situation. Challenges. As if being disabled and broke was just a minor inconvenience, like a leaky faucet or a noisy neighbor. I was hoping to stay here for a few days while I sort things out. Ashley's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Oh, honey, I wish we could help, but you know how it is with the children's schedules. Soccer practice, piano lessons, family obligations. We barely have time to breathe as it is. Family obligations. I wondered if she realized the irony. Besides, she continued, our guest room is being renovated. Has been for months. You know how contractors are. I looked up at their house, all those windows, all those rooms, and knew she was lying, but calling her on it would only make things worse. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, maybe we could help you find a place. There are some nice assisted living facilities. Assisted living costs $3,000 a month, I said flatly. I get $800 from Social Security. There are programs, Ashley chimed in helpfully. Government assistance. I'm sure someone in your situation qualifies for something. Someone in my situation. A burden. A problem to be solved by someone else's programs and someone else's money. What about home health care? Michael suggested, clearly grasping for solutions that didn't involve actually helping. Someone who could come in during the day. That costs money too. Money I don't have. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 people standing in a driveway worth more than most people make in a year, and nobody could figure out how to help a disabled woman who'd raised one of them and helped financially support the others. Look, Michael finally said, let me talk to Ashley tonight. Maybe we can work something out. But his eyes were already telling me the answer, and Ashley's smile had turned into something that belonged in a museum of things that were never genuine to begin with. Don't worry about it, I said, reaching for my wheelchair's control. I'll figure something out. Mom, don't be like that. Like what? Realistic? I started backing down the driveway, my heart breaking with every rotation of the wheels. I understand, Michael. Family is complicated. As I waited for my cab to return, $40 I couldn't afford for the round trip, I heard their front door close with a soft finality. Through the window, I could see them in their kitchen, Ashley gesturing animatedly while Michael nodded, probably discussing how to handle their Helen problem without anyone getting upset. The cab driver, a kind man from Haiti, helped me with my suitcase and didn't ask questions when I gave him my address. During the ride home, I stared out at the suburban neighborhoods full of families having Sunday dinner and wondered when I'd become the kind of person that other people couldn't wait to get rid of. That night, lying on my couch and staring at the ceiling, I realized something that probably should have been obvious all along. I was completely alone. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from hitting rock bottom with a spectacular crash. My hip ached, my pride was in shambles, and my checking account balance was a whopping $237. But for the first time in months, my head was clear. I wheeled myself into Robert's old office, a place I'd barely entered since his funeral 3 years ago. His desk still held his reading glasses, a coffee mug with a permanent ring stain, and stacks of papers I'd never had the heart to sort through. Robert had been meticulous about some things and completely chaotic about others. His filing system, if you could call it that, consisted of shoving important documents into whatever drawer was closest. I started with the top drawer, telling myself I was finally going to organize his affairs properly. Tax returns from 2019, warranty information for a toaster we'd thrown away 2 years ago, restaurant receipts he'd saved for reasons known only to him. Classic Robert, brilliant in some ways, hopeless in others. The middle drawer was more of the same. Old checkbooks, expired coupons, a collection of pens that probably hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. But at the very back, wedged behind a folder of medical bills, my fingers found something something that made me pause. A business card, heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing that screamed money and importance. Pinnacle Private Banking, Discretionary Wealth Management. Below that, a name I didn't recognize. Jonathan Maxwell, Senior Private Banker. I turned the card over. In Robert's cramped handwriting, account jar PMB 7749 RHC. Emergency access only. Emergency access only. I stared at those words for a long moment. If being disabled, broke, and homeless didn't qualify as an emergency, I wasn't sure what would. Robert and I had banked at Community First Federal for 35 years. Our checking account, our mortgage, our small savings account, everything went through Helen Winters, a pleasant woman who'd helped us with our car loans and knew our names when we walked in. Pinnacle Private Banking sounded like something for people who had private jets and vacation homes in the Hamptons. I'd never heard Robert mention it, not once in 43 years of marriage. I turned the card over again, studying the elegant typography and the embossed logo. What kind of account required emergency access only, and why had my practical, cautious husband hidden it in a drawer like some kind of secret? The smart thing would have been to call first, make an appointment, explain the situation over the phone like a reasonable person. But after yesterday's humiliation, reasonable wasn't really in my vocabulary anymore. I called a cab. Pinnacle Private Banking occupied the top 3 floors of the newest downtown tower, the kind of building with marble lobbies and security guards who looked like they'd been recruited from the Secret Service. The directory in the lobby listed wealth management firms, investment companies, and law offices with names like Pemberton and Associates, places where people's problems were solved with signatures on expensive paper. The elevator to the 32nd floor was the quietest I'd ever ridden. No music, no advertising screens, just polished brass and the faint scent of money. When the doors opened, I found myself in a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel than a bank. Leather furniture, original artwork, and a receptionist who managed to look both welcoming and intimidating. "Good morning," she said, with the kind of smile that suggested she was paid very well to be pleasant. "How may I help you?" I held up the business card, hoping I looked more confident than I felt. "I'd like to speak with Jonathan Maxwell." "Please. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have account information." I showed her the card with Robert's handwriting. Her demeanor shifted slightly, not unfriendly, but suddenly more attentive. "One moment, please." She made a quiet phone call, spoke in tones too low for me to hear, then hung up and smiled again. "Mr. Maxwell will see you right away. Janet will escort you." Janet appeared as if by magic, a woman in her 40s wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She led me down a hallway lined with offices where serious people in expensive clothes had serious conversations about what I assumed were very large amounts of money. "Mrs. Carter," she said as we walked, "Mr. Maxwell has been expecting you." Expecting me? I hadn't even known this place existed until an hour ago. We stopped at a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. Behind a mahogany desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier sat a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm competence that suggested he'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "Mrs. Carter," he said, standing up so quickly his chair rolled backward. "Ma'am, please have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" The urgency in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the polite but distant reception I'd expected. Jonathan Maxwell looked like a man who'd been waiting for this moment and wasn't quite sure it was really happening. "I'm fine, thank you." I positioned my wheelchair across from his desk and pulled out Robert's business card. "I found this among my husband's things. He passed away 3 years ago." Jonathan Maxwell took the card and studied it for a moment, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Carter, before we continue, I need to verify your identity. It's standard procedure for accounts of this nature." Accounts of this nature. What exactly had Robert gotten himself into? I handed over my driver's license and Social Security card. Maxwell studied them carefully, made copies, then sat back in his chair and regarded me with something that might have been amazement. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "you need to see this." Jonathan Maxwell turned his computer screen toward me, and the numbers I saw there made absolutely no sense. At first, I thought there was some kind of mistake, maybe an extra zero, maybe the decimal point was in the wrong place. But as my eyes focused on the account summary, the impossible became undeniable. Robert Henry Carter. Current balance, $47,362, $891.42. That can't be right, I whispered. Maxwell's expression was gentle but serious. "Mrs. Carter, your husband maintained this account for 22 years. The balance is accurate. $47 million. My Robert, the man who clipped coupons and drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic until the wheels fell off, had $47 million in a secret bank account." My head started spinning, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out right there in that elegant office. "I don't understand," I managed. "Robert was a book bookkeeper. He worked for Henderson Manufacturing for 30 years. We lived paycheck to paycheck. According to our records, Mr. Carter was much more than a bookkeeper. Maxwell pulled out a thick folder. He was Henderson Manufacturing's primary financial consultant for 2 decades, but more importantly, he was an extraordinarily gifted investor. The folder contained documents I'd never seen before: investment statements, corporate partnership agreements, transaction records going back over 20 years, page after page of financial activity that painted a picture of a man I'd lived with but apparently never really known. This started small, Maxwell explained, pointing to the earliest statements. Your husband brought us his first investment in 2001, $50,000 he'd saved from consulting work. He had an unusual approach to the market, very conservative in some ways, incredibly bold in others. I stared at a document dated 2003 showing Robert's account balance at $200,000. He never told me about any consulting work. According to his instructions, Mrs. Carter, you weren't supposed to know about this account unless something happened to him or you faced a genuine emergency. Maxwell's voice was careful, respectful. He was very specific about that. What kind of emergency? Financial hardship, medical crisis, family abandonment. He paused meaningfully on that last phrase. Mr. Carter was quite detailed in his instructions regarding circumstances that would trigger your access to these funds. Family abandonment. Robert had somehow anticipated that Michael might turn his back on me, had planned for the possibility that I'd end up alone and desperate. The man who'd seemed so simple, so uncomplicated, had been thinking 20 years ahead while I was just trying to get through each month. He made specific arrangements, Maxwell continued, pulling out another document. A monthly allowance if you needed it, $5,000 transferred to any account you specify. But Mrs. Carter, there's more. More? I wasn't sure my heart could handle more. Your husband didn't just invest his own money. Over the years, he identified and funded several promising business ventures. He owned significant stakes in 3 technology companies, 2 restaurants, a small manufacturing firm, and a chain of medical clinics. The room felt like it was tilting. Robert owned restaurants? Among other things, he had an eye for undervalued opportunities and a gift for spotting entrepreneurs who just needed capital to succeed. His portfolio has been generating approximately $2 million annually in passive income. $2 million a year. While I'd been clipping coupons and shopping at thrift stores, worrying about every utility bill and stretching groceries to last the week, Robert had been earning $2 million a year in passive income. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out as barely a whisper. Maxwell leaned back in his chair. According to his notes, Mrs. Carter, your husband believed that money changes people. He didn't want it to change your marriage or your relationship with your son. He wanted to live a normal life with the woman he loved, while secretly ensuring that you'd never have to worry about your future. I thought about all the times I'd worried about money, all the nights I'd laid awake calculating bills, all the small luxuries I'd denied myself, all the stress and anxiety over finances that had shadowed our marriage. Robert had let me carry that burden while sitting on $47 million. He was protecting you, Maxwell said gently, as if he could read my thought. From the pressure, from the changes money brings to relationships, from people who might want things from you. People like Michael and Ashley, people who treated family like a business transaction when they thought you were poor, but who would suddenly become devoted relatives if they knew you were wealthy. There's something else you need to know, Maxwell said, pulling out one final document. Your husband left specific instructions about your son. My heart stopped. What kind of instructions? Michael Carter is to receive no information about this account unless you specifically authorize it. Your husband was quite clear about that. He wrote, and I quote, "My son has shown himself to be influenced by money and status. Helen's inheritance is to be protected from his knowledge and his influence until she decides otherwise." Robert had known. Somehow he'd seen what I'd been blind to, that Michael viewed me as an obligation rather than family, that he'd measured my worth by what I could provide rather than who I was, and he'd made sure to protect me from that knowledge until the moment I truly needed protection. What do I do now? I asked. Maxwell smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him. Mrs. Carter, you do whatever you want. You have the resources to live any life you choose. The question is, what kind of life do you want to live? I stared out those floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below, thinking about Michael's perfect house and Ashley's fake smile and my empty checking account and my impossible situation. 24 hours ago, I'd been a burden begging for charity from my own family. Now I was one of the wealthiest women in the state, and nobody else knew it yet. The ride home from Pinnacle Private Banking felt like traveling between 2 different universes. I kept the folder of documents clutched in my lap, afraid that if I let go, everything everything would disappear, and I'd wake up back in my wheelchair with $200 to my name and nowhere to go. But the papers were real. The account was real. $47 million was real. And Robert's deception was real too. By the time my cab pulled into my driveway, I'd moved past shock and landed squarely in anger. Not at the money. How could I be angry about financial security? But at the lie our entire marriage had been built on. Every conversation about money, every budget discussion, every time I'd worried about making ends meet, Robert had been sitting on a fortune that could have eliminated every stress from our lives. I'd loved a man I'd never really known. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden next door when I rolled up my ramp. She waved cheerfully, probably wondering why I was in such a good mood after yesterday's family disaster. If only she knew. Inside, I spread the documents across my kitchen table and really read them for the first time. The scope of Robert's secret life was staggering. Not just investments, but partnerships in businesses I'd never heard him mention. A medical clinic in Tampa that bore our last name, Carter Family Medical Center. A restaurant chain called Helen's Kitchen that specialized in comfort food. Helen's Kitchen. He'd named a restaurant chain after me and never told me it existed. I found my laptop, the old one Robert had bought for staying connected with the grandchildren, and started researching. The Carter Family Medical Center was thriving, providing affordable health care to low-income families. Helen's Kitchen had 18 locations across Florida and Georgia, known for generous portions and prices that working families could afford. While I'd been struggling to pay for my own medical care, there was a medical clinic bearing my husband's name, providing free services to people in similar situations. The irony was almost unbearable. My phone rang, startling me out of my research. Michael's name appeared on the screen. "Hello, Michael? Mom, Ashley and I talked last night." His voice had that careful tone again, the one that meant he'd rehearsed this conversation. "We want to help, but we need to be realistic about our limitations. Of course, we've found some programs that might work for your situation. There's a county assistance program for seniors, and there are some subsidized housing options that might be appropriate." Subsidized housing. Yesterday, the suggestion would have devastated me. Today, knowing what I knew, it was almost funny. "That's very thoughtful of you, Michael. The thing is, Mom, we can't solve this problem for you. You need professional help. Social workers, case managers, people who understand the system. The system. As if I was some kind of social problem to be processed through the appropriate bureaucratic channels. "You're probably right," I said calmly. "Really?" He sounded surprised by my lack of resistance. "I mean, I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." Reasonable. I was being reasonable by accepting that my son viewed me as a problem to be solved by other people's programs and other people's resources. "Ashley found a case manager who specializes in elder care transitions," he continued. "Her name is Sandra Morrison, and she can meet with you tomorrow if you're interested." "That sounds perfect. Great. I'll give you her number." He paused, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "Mom, I know this is hard, but you'll see. Sometimes these programs work out better than family arrangements. There's less emotional complication. Translation, less guilt for him, less responsibility, less need to actually help his mother in any meaningful way. You're absolutely right, Michael. Family can be complicated." After he hung up, I sat staring at the documents scattered across my table. $47 million, and my son was arranging for me to meet with social services about subsidized housing. The gulf between what my life actually was and what everyone believed it to be was almost surreal. I picked up my phone and called Pinnacle Private Banking. "Jonathan Maxwell's office. This is Helen Carter. I'd like to speak with Mr. Maxwell about implementing my husband's monthly allowance arrangement." "Of course, Mrs. Carter. Hold one moment." Maxwell came on the line quickly. "Mrs. Carter, how can I help you?" "I'd like to set up the $5,000 monthly transfer, and I have some questions about the businesses Robert invested in." "Absolutely. I can have the transfer set up within the hour. Just provide me with your bank routing information." "And Mrs. Carter?" "Yes?" "Your husband would be proud of you. He always said you were stronger than you knew." That evening, I ordered Chinese food from the most expensive restaurant in town and ate it while reading through Robert's investment files. Sweet and sour chicken never tasted so good when you knew you could afford to eat it every night for the rest of your life without making a dent in your bank account. My phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Helen, just wanted to follow up on tomorrow's meeting with Sandra Morrison. She'll be there at 2 p.m. to discuss your options. So glad we could help connect you with appropriate resources." Appropriate resources. As if I was a community problem that required professional intervention rather than family support. I typed back, "Thank you so much for your help. This is exactly what I needed." And it was exactly what I needed. Not the meeting with the case manager, but the crystal clear understanding of how my own family really saw me. Poor, helpless, and someone else's responsibility. Tomorrow, Sandra Morrison would come to assess my situation and recommend appropriate assistance programs for seniors in financial distress. She'd find a woman in a wheelchair, living alone, with limited income and no family support. What she wouldn't find, what nobody would know unless I decided to tell them, was that the woman she was helping was worth $47 million. But first, I had some research to do. Because if Robert had taught me anything, it was that information was power. And after 43 years of marriage to a man I'd never really known, I was finally ready to learn who my husband had really been. And maybe, in the process, I'd figure out who I was going to be. Helen's Story, chapters 6 to 10. Sandra Morrison arrived exactly at 2 o'clock, carrying a briefcase full of forms and wearing the kind of determined smile that social workers perfect after years of dealing with difficult situations. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with graying hair and clothes that suggested competence without trying too hard to impress. "Mrs. Carter, it's wonderful to meet you. Your son spoke very highly of you when he called." I'll bet he did. Probably described me as a sweet old lady who just needed a little guidance navigating the complex world of senior services. "Please sit down. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely, thank you." I wheeled myself into the kitchen, grateful that I'd hidden all of Robert's financial documents in his office before Sandra arrived. The kitchen looked exactly like what she'd expect to see. Old appliances, a few dishes in the sink, the general air of someone getting by on limited resources. "Your son mentioned you've been having some challenges since your accident," Sandra said as I served coffee in my second best cup. The good china was still packed away from when Robert died. Because what was the point of using fancy dishes when you were eating alone? "The house isn't very wheelchair accessible," I admitted, "and the medical bills have been challenging." Sandra nodded sympathetically while pulling forms from her briefcase. "That's unfortunately very common. The good news is that there are several programs designed specifically for situations like yours, situations like mine." If only she knew. "I've reviewed your preliminary information, and I think you'd be an excellent candidate for the county senior housing initiative. It's a wonderful program, subsidized apartments specifically designed for seniors with mobility challenges." "That sounds interesting," I said, settling into my role as grateful recipient of government assistance. "The apartments are quite nice, actually. All first-floor units, roll-in showers, grab bars, emergency call systems, and the best part is that rent is based on income, so you'd pay approximately 30% of your Social Security benefit, about $240 a month. Yesterday, that would have sounded like salvation. Today, it sounded like exactly the kind of place my son expected me to end up. "There is a waiting list," Sandra continued, "but I have some connections. I think I could get you moved up, especially given your circumstances." "What kind of timeline are we looking at? If everything goes smoothly, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks of Michael feeling like he'd solved the Helen problem without actually having to do anything himself. 6 to 8 weeks of him telling people how he'd found appropriate resources for his mother's situation." "That's very helpful," I said. "What else would I need to know?" Sandra launched into a detailed explanation of the application process, income verification requirements, and various support services available to residents. She was genuinely enthusiastic about the program, and I found myself liking her despite the circumstances. "There's also a wonderful senior center right next to the complex," she said. "Activities, meals, transportation services. You'd have a real community there. A community of other elderly people whose families had decided they needed appropriate resources instead of actual support." The thought was more depressing than Sandra probably realized. "Mrs. Carter, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Your son seems very concerned about you, but he also seems distant. Is everything okay there?" I studied Sandra's face. She'd obviously dealt with enough family situations to recognize the signs of relatives who cared more about appearing helpful than actually helping. "Michael has his own family to worry about," I said carefully. "I understand that I can't be his first priority, but you're still his mother." "Yes, but being someone's mother doesn't guarantee their devotion, does it?" Sandra's expression softened. "No, it doesn't, and I'm sorry if that's been your experience." For a moment, I almost told her everything, about yesterday's humiliation, about Michael's cold dismissal, about how it felt to realize your own child viewed you as a burden. But Sandra was here to solve problems, not provide therapy. "The housing program sounds perfect," I said instead. "What do I need to do to apply?" We spent the next hour filling out forms and gathering documents. Sandra was thorough and patient, explaining every section and making sure I understood the process. By the time she left, I had a complete application package and a clear timeline for the next steps. "Mrs. Carter," she said as she packed up her briefcase, "I want you to know that this doesn't have to be the end of your independence. The senior housing complex has residents in their 80s and 90s who are living full full, active lives. This could be a new beginning, not just a solution to a problem. A new beginning. Sandra had no idea how right she was, just not in the way she imagined. After she left, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the application forms and thinking about Robert's secret empire. Somewhere in Florida, there was a medical clinic named after our family providing free health care to people who couldn't afford it. Somewhere else, there were restaurants named after me, serving affordable meals to working families. My husband had been quietly building a legacy of helping people while I'd known nothing about it. He'd seen problems in the world and used his money to solve them, without fanfare or recognition, or even my knowledge. What would he think about me hiding in this house, pretending to be poor, while my own son arranged for me to live in subsidized housing? I wheeled myself back to Robert's office and pulled out his files again. This time, I looked more carefully at the business partnerships and investment structures. The medical clinic wasn't just providing free services, it was profitable enough to expand. Helen's Kitchen wasn't just feeding people, it was creating jobs and building wealth while serving communities that bigger chains ignored. Robert hadn't just been hiding money, he'd been building something meaningful. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "How did the meeting go with Sandra? Ashley and I are hoping she found some good options for you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Sandra was wonderful. She found exactly what I need," which was true, just not in the way Michael would expect, because what I needed wasn't subsidized housing or government assistance or my son's reluctant help. What I needed was to understand what Robert had really been doing with his secret fortune and maybe figure out how to continue his work. But first, I needed to understand why he'd kept it secret from me for 22 years, and I had a feeling that understanding that would change everything. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was reading through more of Robert's business files when the doorbell rang at 9:30. Through the window, I could see a black sedan in my driveway and a woman in an expensive suit standing on my porch. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Victoria Hayes from Meridian Legal Services. I represent several of your late husband's business interests." Victoria Hayes looked like money, the kind of understated elegance that comes from custom tailoring and confidence. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her briefcase probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. What business interests? May I come in? This is a conversation we should have privately." I led her to the living room, curious and slightly nervous. Victoria settled into Robert's old armchair with the kind of grace that suggested she was accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. "Mrs. Carter, I've been your husband's attorney for 15 years. He retained me specifically to handle the legal aspects of his investment activities and to ensure proper succession planning." Succession planning? Robert was very concerned about what would happen to his various enterprises after his death. He wanted to ensure they continue to serve their intended purposes while also providing for your security. Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Are you familiar with the Carter Foundation?" "No. Your husband established it 8 years ago. It's a private foundation that funds community health initiatives, affordable food programs, and emergency assistance for families in crisis." Robert had created a foundation and never mentioned it. The hits just kept coming. "The foundation currently has assets of approximately $12 million and distributes about $800,000 annually in grants, $800,000 a year in charitable giving." And I'd been clipping coupons and worrying about grocery money. "Mrs. Carter, according to Robert's instructions, you're now the sole trustee of the Carter Foundation. But there's something else you need to know." Victoria's expression grew more serious. "Your husband was very specific about the timing of this information. I was only to contact you if certain conditions were met." "What conditions? Financial distress, family abandonment, or evidence that you were being exploited by relatives?" There was that phrase again, family abandonment. Robert had somehow anticipated that Michael would fail me when I needed help most. "Robert hired a private investigator to monitor your situation after his death," Victoria continued. "Nothing intrusive, just periodic welfare checks to ensure you were being properly cared for." "Someone's been watching me?" "More like watching out for you. The investigator reports to my office monthly. When you showed up at your son's house yesterday asking for help and were turned away, that triggered the protocols Robert established. My husband had been protecting me from beyond the grave, and I'd never even known I needed protection." "There's more," Victoria said, pulling out another set of documents. "Robert was quite concerned about your son's character." "What do you mean?" "Michael has some significant financial problems, Mrs. Carter. Gambling debts primarily. Our investigator has been tracking his activities for 3 years." The world tilted sideways. "Gambling debts?" "Approximately $400,000 to various creditors, some of them not particularly patient about repayment. Your son has been managing his cash flow crisis by borrowing against his house and liquidating his retirement account." Michael's perfect suburban life was built on a foundation of debt and desperation. No wonder he couldn't help me. He was probably barely keeping his own head above of water. But there's something else you need to know, Victoria continued. 2 weeks ago, Michael contacted several attorneys asking about elder competency procedures. My blood ran cold. What kind of procedures? The process for having an elderly relative declared mentally incompetent so their assets can be managed by a family member. The room started spinning. Michael hadn't been avoiding me because I was inconvenient. He'd been planning to have me declared incompetent so he could control whatever money he thought I might have. Of course, he doesn't know about Robert's actual estate, Victoria said. He's assuming you have some modest savings and maybe a small life insurance payout. But Mrs. Carter, if he'd succeeded in having you declared incompetent, he could have gained access to everything. Everything. $47 million that Michael would have gambled away to pay his debts. Robert anticipated this possibility, Victoria continued. He left very specific instructions about what to do if Michael ever attempted legal action against you. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's handwriting. What is it? His final message to you, along with a complete plan for protecting yourself and your assets from anyone who might try to exploit you. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in Robert's careful script. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, it means the worst has happened. Our son has shown his true character. I hoped I was wrong about Michael, but I prepared for the possibility that I was right. You are about to learn things about me, about our marriage, and about Michael that will hurt. I kept secrets from you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to give you the chance to love our son without seeing his flaws. I failed as a father, Helen. Somehow, I raised a man who sees people as resources instead of relationships, but I will not let him hurt you. Everything I built was for you. The businesses, the investments, the foundation, it's all yours now. Use it wisely. Use it to build the life you deserve. And if Michael comes for you legally, remember this. The trap is already set. He just hasn't walked into it yet. All my love, Robert. I looked up at Victoria, who was watching me with a mixture of sympathy and steely determination. What trap? Victoria smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked genuinely pleased. Mrs. Carter, your husband was a very clever man. Would you like to hear his plan? Victoria Hayes spread a series of documents across my coffee table, like a general planning a military campaign. Each paper was precisely placed, each detail carefully explained, and slowly I began to understand that my mild-mannered husband had been far more devious than I'd ever imagined. Robert's strategy was elegant in its simplicity, Victoria said, pointing to a complex legal document. If Michael ever attempted to have you declared incompetent, he would unknowingly trigger a series of automatic financial transfers that would destroy him. What kind of transfers? All of Michael's debts would be consolidated under a loan guarantee that Robert secretly co-signed 3 years ago. The moment any legal challenge to your competency is filed, that guarantee becomes due immediately. I stared at the document. Robert guaranteed Michael's debts without telling him? $412,000 plus interest and penalties. The creditors have been remarkably patient because they know Robert's estate is backing the debt. But if Michael moves against you legally, they'll demand full payment within 30 days. The elegance of it was breathtaking. Robert had given Michael enough rope to hang himself, then waited to see if he'd use it. But that's not all, Victoria continued, sliding another document toward me. Michael's mortgage, his car loans, and his business credit line are all tied to financial institutions that Robert invested in. If the debt guarantee is triggered, all of those loans become callable immediately. Meaning Michael would lose everything. His house, his cars, his business, unless he could come up with approximately $800,000 in cash within 30 days. $800,000. The same amount the Carter Foundation distributed annually to help families in crisis. Robert had made sure Michael would learn exactly what that kind of financial catastrophe felt like. How is this possible? How could Robert arrange all this without Michael knowing? Victoria smiled grimly. Your husband was a financial genius, Mrs. Carter. He understood that people like Michael never read the fine print. They just focus on getting what they want. Every loan Michael took out, every credit line he opened, Robert quietly influenced the terms through his business connections. And if Michael doesn't challenge my competency, then nothing happens. He continues making his payments, struggling with his debts, but keeping his house and his family's lifestyle. Robert gave him a choice: leave you alone and keep what he has, or come after you and lose everything. I thought about yesterday's visit to Michael's perfect suburban palace. Every luxury in that house, every symbol of success was built on a foundation that Robert could collapse with a single legal filing. There's something else, Victoria said, pulling out a final document. If Michael does trigger the debt consolidation, there's a provision for you to purchase his house at fair market value, assuming you want it. Why would I want Michael's house? You wouldn't want the house, Mrs. Carter, but you might want the satisfaction of evicting the son who abandoned his disabled mother, then offering to let him rent it back from you at market rates. The vindictive side of me, aside side I didn't know existed until this week, found that idea deeply satisfying. Robert thought of everything, didn't he? He spent 3 years planning this, every angle, every contingency, every possible scenario. He loved you enough to become someone you wouldn't recognize in order to protect you from someone you'd spent your life protecting. We sat in silence for a moment while I absorbed the full scope of Robert's strategy. My gentle, quiet husband had been running a financial intelligence operation that would have impressed the CIA. What happens now? Now we wait. According to our investigator, Michael has an appointment with an elder law attorney tomorrow morning. If he proceeds with competency action, we'll know within 48 hours. And if he does, then we spring the trap your husband spent 3 years building. Victoria began packing her documents back into her briefcase. Mrs. Carter, I need to ask you something personal. Are you prepared for what this might do to your relationship with Michael? I thought about sitting in that driveway yesterday, being dismissed like a door-to-door salesperson. I thought about the cold calculation in Ashley's eyes and the way Michael had looked at me like I was an inconvenience to be managed. Victoria, I spent 43 years married to a man who loved me enough to build a financial empire while letting me worry about grocery money. I spent 30 years raising a son who would rather see me in subsidized housing than disrupt his perfect family routine. I think it's time I stopped protecting people who wouldn't protect me. Victoria nodded approvingly. Your husband said you were stronger than you knew. I'm beginning to see what he meant. After Victoria left, I sat in Robert's office surrounded by the evidence of his secret life and tried to reconcile the man I'd loved with the strategic mastermind he'd apparently been. Every document told a story of careful planning and patient maneuvering, of a man who'd seen problems coming years before they arrived and had quietly prepared solutions. The medical clinic, the restaurants, the foundation, the trap set for Michael. It was all part of a comprehensive plan to take care of me while protecting me from the people who might hurt me, including our own son. My phone rang at 6 o'clock. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Hi, Mom. How are you feeling about everything Sandra discussed yesterday? I'm feeling very optimistic, actually. Good, that's great to hear. Listen, Ashley and I have been talking, and we think it might be helpful if we were more involved in your transition planning. More involved. After 3 years of barely visiting and 24 hours of treating me like a charity case, Michael suddenly wanted to be involved. What kind of involvement? Well, there are probably financial decisions you'll need to make. Bank accounts to close, assets to liquidate, that kind of thing. We thought it might be easier if we helped manage those details. Assets to liquidate. Michael was already planning how to access whatever money he thought I might have. That's very thoughtful of you, Michael, but I think I can handle my own financial affairs. Mom, with all due respect, you've never been great with money. Remember how Dad always handled the investments and the banking? You might be in over your head trying to manage everything alone. Dad always handled the investments. If only Michael knew what Robert had actually been investing in and how spectacularly successful he'd been. I appreciate your concern, but I'm managing just fine. Are you sure? Because Ashley knows a really good financial advisor who specializes in helping seniors transition their assets efficiently. It could save you a lot of stress and maybe some money in taxes too. A financial advisor who could help identify exactly what assets existed and maybe recommend that a concerned family member be given power of attorney to ensure proper management. I don't think that's necessary right now. Michael, okay, but Mom, promise me you won't make any major financial decisions without talking to us first. At your age, it's easy to make mistakes that could cost you everything. At my age, as if turning 68 had somehow erased 40 years of managing household finances and making intelligent decisions. I promise I'll be very careful with my money, Michael. Which was true. I plan to be extremely careful with my $47 million, especially when it came to protecting them from my son. The call came at 10:15 the next morning. Victoria Hayes' voice was calm and professional, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. Mrs. Carter, it's done. Michael filed a petition for competency evaluation this morning at 9:45. Judge Henderson has scheduled a preliminary hearing for next Friday. My son had pulled the trigger. After everything I'd done for him, every sacrifice I'd made, every way I'd supported his dreams and ambitions, Michael had decided to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my finances. How long do we have? The debt consolidation notices were sent automatically when the court filing was processed. Michael's creditors have 30 days to demand payment, but most will probably move much faster once they realize what's happened. And his mortgage? Callable as of this afternoon. First National Bank will probably contact him within hours. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. This was really happening. Robert's 3-year plan was finally in motion. There's something else, Mrs. Carter. Michael apparently told the court that he's concerned about your mental state because you've been making erratic financial decisions and talking about money you don't actually have. Erratic financial decisions? He cited your withdrawal of $5,000 from your bank account yesterday yesterday as evidence of confused thinking. $5,000. Jonathan Maxwell had processed the first monthly transfer from Robert's account exactly as I'd requested. To Michael, that must have looked like a desperate woman spending money she didn't have. He has no idea what's coming, does he? None whatsoever. Mrs. Carter, there's one more thing. Our investigator reports that Ashley has already contacted 3 estate sale companies about liquidating assets from an elderly relative's home. My stomach clenched. Ashley was already planning to sell my furniture, my belongings, everything Robert and I had accumulated in 43 years of marriage. In her mind, I was already gone, just a problem solved and assets liquidated. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. Just sit tight and let Robert's plan unfold. But Mrs. Carter, you should prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly very quickly. She was right. By 2 o'clock, my phone was ringing constantly. Michael called 4 times, each message more panicked than the last. By the 4th call, his voice was shaking. Mom, something crazy is happening with my mortgage. The bank is saying they need to review my loan terms immediately. Can you call me back? This is urgent. I didn't call him back. At 4:30, Ashley called. Helen, we need to talk. Michael's having some kind of financial emergency, and we think it might be connected to your court situation. Can you meet us tonight? This is really important. I didn't call her back either. At 7 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Michael's car in my driveway, and both him and Ashley standing on my porch. Michael looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and Ashley's perfect composure had cracked around the edges. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. Mom, we need to talk, Michael said immediately. Something's gone wrong with my loans. Every bank, every credit company, they're all demanding immediate payment. They're saying I guaranteed debts I never even heard of. That sounds complicated. It's more than complicated. It's impossible. They're saying Dad co-signed loan guarantees for over $400,000. But that can't be right, can it? Dad never mentioned anything like that to you, did he? Robert had co-signed those guarantees 3 years ago, knowing exactly what would happen if Michael ever came after me legally. My husband had planned this conversation down to the last detail. Your father handled all the financial matters, I said truthfully. I rarely knew what he was doing with investments and business arrangements. Ashley stepped forward, her fake smile nowhere in evidence. Helen, this is serious. If these loan guarantees are real, we could lose everything. The house, the cars, everything. I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that? Ashley's voice rose an octave. Helen, this affects you too. If Michael loses his house, where do you think you're going to live when you can't take care of yourself anymore? Interesting. Yesterday, I was too much of a burden to stay in their guest room for a week. Today, I was part of their long-term housing plan. I think I'll manage, I said calmly. Michael was staring at me with growing confusion. Mom, did you hire a lawyer? Because someone filed papers opposing my competency petition, and they seem to know an awful lot about my personal finances. I'm represented by Meridian Legal Services. Meridian Legal Services? Mom, those guys charge $500 an hour. How are you paying for that kind of legal representation? $500 an hour sounded reasonable for protecting $47 million. Michael had no idea he was asking exactly the wrong question. I'm managing my affairs just fine, Michael. Ashley's patience finally snapped. This is ridiculous. Helen, whatever games you're playing, they need to stop right now. Michael was trying to help you, and somehow that's triggered some kind of financial nightmare. You need to fix this. I need to fix this? Yes. Call your lawyer. Withdraw whatever papers you filed, and let's work together to resolve this situation like adult. Like adult. As if Michael trying to have me declared incompetent was the mature, responsible approach to family problem solving. I don't think that's going to happen. Michael was starting to realize that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. Mom, are you saying you won't help me with this loan situation? I'm saying that I think you should have thought about the consequences before you decided to have your disabled mother declared mentally incompetent so you could access her bank account. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Both Michael and Ashley stared at me in shock, probably because they'd never heard me speak so bluntly about anything. That's not what this was about, Michael said weakly. Really? Then what was it about? It was about protecting you from making bad financial decisions. You're vulnerable, Mom. People could take advantage of you. People could take advantage of me. The irony was so rich it was almost funny. You're right, Michael. People could definitely take advantage of a disabled elderly woman. It's good that your father planned ahead for that possibility. Ashley was looking between us with growing alarm. What do you mean planned ahead? I smiled at her, the kind of smile I'd learned from watching her use it on me. I mean that my husband was a very intelligent man who understood exactly what kind of person our son really is. And for the first time in 3 days, I closed the door on their stunned faces and left them standing on my porch. Tomorrow, they'd learn exactly how intelligent Robert had been. The next morning brought the most satisfying phone call of my life. Victoria Hayes sounded positively delighted. Mrs. Carter, I have wonderful news. First National Bank moved to foreclose on Michael's mortgage at 8 o'clock this morning. His car loan loans are being called due immediately, and the gambling debt consolidation notices went out to all creditors last night. How much time does he have? 14 days to bring all accounts current or face immediate asset seizure. The total amount due is approximately $870,000. $870,000 that Michael didn't have and couldn't possibly raise in 2 weeks. Robert's trap had been sprung, and it was working exactly as designed. There's more, Victoria continued. Michael's attorney withdrew from his competency case this morning after discovering the financial conflict of interest. Apparently, trying to have someone declared incompetent while owing them almost $1 million creates some ethical complications. And the hearing? Postponed indefinitely while the court sorts out the financial entanglements. Mrs. Carter, your son's legal case just collapsed completely. I felt a satisfaction so profound it was almost spiritual. Michael had tried to steal my independence and my dignity, and instead he'd lost everything. My doorbell rang at 10:30. This time, only Michael stood on my porch. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, and his expensive clothes couldn't hide the fact that he was a man who'd just realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Mom, please, can we talk? I opened the door and let him in, curious to hear what he had to say now that his world was falling apart. I know you're angry, he began, settling onto my couch like a man trying not to disturb a sleeping bomb. And maybe you have a right to be, but Mom, I'm losing everything. My house, my business, everything I've worked for my entire life. That must be terrifying. It is. And the worst part is, I can't figure out how Dad knew to set up all these financial arrangements. Did he predict this somehow? Did he know I would try to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my money? Michael flinched. It wasn't about stealing anything. I was genuinely worried about you. Were you worried when you wouldn't let me stay in your house for a week? Were you worried when Ashley suggested I should be grateful for government assistance? Or did you only start worrying when you thought there might be money involved? Mom, that's not fair. Fair? I laughed, and the sound surprised both of us. Michael, you want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair. I wheeled myself to Robert's office and returned with one of his financial statements. Michael's eyes widened when he saw the Pinnacle private banking letterhead. Your father left me $47 million, Michael. $47 million. He spent 22 years building a fortune while I worried about grocery bills. And he did it all to protect me from ending up dependent on people who might not have my best interests at heart. Michael stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. 47 million? That's impossible. Your father was a financial genius. He just hid it very well. I pulled out more statements, more evidence of Robert's secret empire. He also left me control of a medical foundation, restaurant chains, and various business partnerships worth millions more. Mom, I had no idea. If I'd known, if you'd known what? You would have been nice to me? You would have let me stay in your guest room? You would have treated me like family instead of a burden? Michael's face was pale. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The gambling debt, the financial problems. I was desperate. So you decided to solve your financial problems by stealing from your disabled mother. I wasn't trying to steal from you. I thought you might have a small insurance payout or some savings that you weren't managing properly. I was trying to protect you from making mistakes by having me declared mentally incompetent. Yes, no, I don't know anymore. Michael put his head in his hands. Mom, I'm sorry. I know I handled this wrong, but please, you have to help me. I'm going to lose everything. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, loved, supported, and sacrificed for, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no maternal instinct to protect him from the consequences of his action. Just a calm, clear recognition of who he really was. Michael, your father spent 3 years setting up this situation. Every debt guarantee, every loan term, every financial arrangement was designed to give you a choice. Treat me with respect and keep what you have, or come after me legally and lose everything. But I didn't know that. You didn't need to know that. All you needed to do was be a decent son to your mother. That was the only requirement. Michael was crying now, desperate tears of a man watching his life collapse around him. Mom, please, I'll do anything. I'll take care of you. I'll move you into our house. I'll be the son you deserve. Just help me fix this. Do you know what I'm going to do with your father's money, Michael? He looked up hopefully. I'm going to expand the medical foundation. I'm going to open more restaurants that serve affordable food to working families. I'm going to help people who are struggling the way I was struggling. People whose families have abandoned them the way you abandoned me. But what about me? What about you? I'm your son. I'm your family. I wheeled myself closer to him, him and looked directly into his eyes. Michael, yesterday I was your family when I needed help. But today, when you need help, I've learned something important from your example. What's that? Family is complicated. I called Victoria Hayes that afternoon and instructed her to proceed with the foreclosure and asset seizure processes. I also asked her to arrange for me to purchase Michael's house at fair market value. Not because I wanted it, but because Robert's plan included one final twist. A week later, I had the locks changed and arranged for Michael and Ashley's belongings to be moved to a storage unit. I hired Sandra Morrison, the case manager, who tried to help me find subsidized housing, to convert the house into transitional housing for seniors who'd been abandoned by their families. The irony was perfect. Michael's dream house would become a sanctuary for elderly people whose children had decided they needed appropriate resources instead of family support. 6 months later, I sat in my new office at the Carter Foundation, reviewing grant applications and planning the expansion of Helen's Kitchen restaurants. The foundation now provided emergency assistance to families in crisis, funded free medical care for seniors, and operated 3 transitional housing facilities for elderly people who'd been abandoned by their families. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. He'd been sending messages for months, alternating between apologies, demands, and desperate pleas for financial help. This one read, "Mom, Ashley left me. I'm living in a studio apartment and working 2 jobs to pay minimum payments on my debts. I know I made mistakes, but I'm your son. Please call me back." I deleted the message without reading it completely, just like I'd deleted all the others. Because the truth was, I'd learned something profound about the difference between being someone's mother and being their family. Being someone's mother was an accident of biology. Being their family required love, respect, and mutual care. Michael had been my son for 38 years, but he'd never really been my family. And now, surrounded by people who helped seniors who'd been discarded by their relatives, I'd finally found the family I deserved. The family Robert had spent 3 years planning for me to find. Robert always said I was stronger than I knew. It just took losing everything to discover he was right. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.